The third-generation Mitsubishi Pajero Sport launched on the Russian market in the summer of 2016, and at first the Russian office brought only the gasoline version from Thailand. However, in the spring of 2017, heavy fuel modifications managed to reach our dealers. This happened solely due to the fact that the manufacturer agreed to give a discount to the Moscow representative office, and from that moment on, sales of the models went up. Yes, so it made economic sense to organize assembly at the Kaluga plant SMA Rus. Let's immediately clarify that only diesel versions were produced in Russia. And all imported gasoline cars were made by Pajero Sport in a full cycle. That is, with welding, painting and body assembly. But the welding, painting and anti-corrosion treatment of the frame skeletons was entrusted to the Gorky automobile plant. However, in the spring of 2022, as you might have guessed, Mitsubishi production on the Russian assembly line stopped. Restyled versions younger than 2021 with double-decker front optics and more compact rear lights are especially held in high esteem, and even recently parallel cars have appeared on the market, that is, new but imported according to gray schemes and from other countries, usually the Middle East, and this is a very unique purchase because such cars will have a minimum of anti-corrosion sound insulation, and may also not have the usual options. Russian operating experience has shown that many Pajero drivers had to take advantage of the warranty. Most of the complaints related to corrosion, red bugs could be found even on new copies purchased just a few months ago. The list of complaints continues with the rather delicate paintwork. It can swell with bubbles on the hood lid of the fifth door and less often on the side doors, and then corrosion also begins to spread from under these bubbles. The meticulous owner sought to eliminate the problems. So you definitely shouldn't be surprised at a locally repainted body. Moreover, there are examples that have already been painted several times and not always successfully. As fans of the model found out, choosing a color is easy if the Kaluga assembled car is painted white or black with enamel. Agree that against this background, the question of the few chrome finishes, which tend to become cloudy on older vehicles, is already a trifle, just like a worn windshield on a car with high mileage. In fact, soft windshields are a known problem in many modern cars. It is also aggravated by worn-out windshield wiper blades and, of course, everything that flies from under the wheels of neighbors in the traffic flow. In order to gain good visibility, you have to pour whole liters of washer fluid onto the windshield. Especially in winter, alas, there is no way without this because our safety depends on the transparency of the windshield. From the interior of the third-generation Pajero Sport, we note a rare failure of the standard multimedia. First of all, we recommend removing the ceiling upholstery in order to cover the bare sheet of metal with a good layer of thermal insulation material. Otherwise, this winter, condensation may ooze under the upholstery. But let's tell you a secret that some dealers insulated the roofs of SUVs for free, but for this they had to show some persistence, so to speak. Starting the discussion of engines, I'll immediately note that approximately 90% of all Pajero Sport are diesel cars. I'll remind you that a 2.4-liter unit is hidden under the hood. It replaced the well-deserved 4D56 series. The newcomer is distinguished by its riding character. So it develops a maximum of 430 Nm of torque at 2,500 RPM, which is quite high for an SUV or pickup truck. But the balancer shafts here are already driven by a chain, whereas previously the Mitsubishi engineer used a not very reliable belt. But the auxiliary unit is traditionally driven by a belt, which, however, is equipped with a not very reliable tensioner roller. To change the timing chain, be prepared to remove the engine from the engine compartment. The most common problems are considered to be the particulate filter becoming clogged with combustion products, as well as the recirculation system valve. In addition, soot has a habit of accumulating in the intake manifold, and when it comes to extremes, the control unit begins to throw an error. Cleaning naturally solves all of the above problems, but the frequency of this cleaning depends on operating conditions, so malfunctions caused by deposits mostly affect those whose main operating mode is short city runs with frequent driving on highways. All these environmental bells and whistles work without problems. However, this is a feature of all modern diesel engines rather than a minus of a specific engine. But the delicate cylinder head, which suffers from the slightest overheating, will certainly remain on the conscience of Mitsubishi engineers. And in addition, an extremely dangerous malfunction of this engine was the self-destruction of the timing belt. Its service life should be 90,000 kilometers. However, there have been cases when plastic valve covers lost their tightness and began to waste lubricant, and the leaking oil undermined the health of the belt. Remember, if you notice oil leaks, immediately start replacing the gaskets, because such a small thing can cause a subsequent overhaul of the engine, and the engine can also be destroyed by an aged oil pump. its first operation stopped actively pumping lubricant through itself after 100,000 kilometers. In the current version, the unit begins to filament, well, somewhere after 150 to 200,000 kilometers, so as soon as you hear the ringing clatter of the hydraulic compensators at idle. Start looking for a new oil pump, otherwise the engine will begin to grind itself from the inside when dry, and the camshaft beds will be the first to suffer from this. By the way, if you decide to look for a modification that consumes gasoline, keep in mind that they usually live in the north of the Far East or Siberia. When diagnosing before purchasing the northern or Siberian version, look not only at the mileage, but also at the engine hours or the amount of fuel consumed by the engine, because in cold regions the engines sometimes do not turn off at night or they start it often, which greatly reduces the resource. We move on to the transmission to a rare manual gearbox. There are at least a minimum of complaints, because even the clutch usually lasts for 150,000 kilometers. Complaints are only encountered about unclear engagement of the reverse gear, because sometimes you have to make several attempts to engage reverse. The automatic transmission is supplied by the Aishin brand. However, the unit of the TL80SN series, which has earned the reputation of a reliable companion, can also be found on some Toyotas, Lexuses, and other Japanese cars. Only on Mitsubishi cars the strong 8-speed suddenly decided to kick when changing gears. The owner updated the firmware, carried out adaptation, changed the gas station to refresh the control software if the car is older than 2020. The all-wheel drive system will also be useful. This is the proprietary Super Select 2, which many Jeepers consider the standard among all-wheel drive transmissions. Let us briefly recall the essence. It allows you to constantly drive on any surface at any speed, even in rear-wheel drive, or in all-wheel drive when going off-road. You can lock the center differential, engage a downshift, and if there is an urgent need to activate the locking of the rear differential of the third generation, Mitsubishi Pajero Sport received an improved version of the second Super Select built around an asymmetrical limited slip differential torsion that delivers up to 60% of the torque to the rear axle, whereas before the Japanese SUV relied on a combination of a symmetrical differential and a viscous couplings. The new generation of the system, as engineers assure, works much faster. In general, the recommendations will be general. After 100 to 120,000 kilometers, start looking closely at the oil seals of the main gears, the cardan shaft crosspieces and the rear universal joint support. By the way, the Pajero Sport has one feature that frightens those who get behind the wheel of this car for the first time in all-wheel drive mode. Each press of the accelerator pedal can be accompanied by a small poke. Out of habit, you might think that this is a classic example of wear on the front drive shaft, but no such a phenomenon is typical even completely new cars. In terms of the chassis design, this Mitsubishi is a real conservative. The front suspension in a design that uses double wishbones turned out to be almost eternal. To replace parts, you most likely won't need to look up to 100,000 kilometers, unless, of course, you count the replacement of cheap stabilizer bushings as a full-fledged repair. They are usually enough for 50,000 kilometers, but there is a nuance. The first car buyers complained about two flabby shock absorbers with them. The SUV swayed strongly on uneven surfaces, and when the amplitude of the swing reached a serious value, the Pajero Sport began to literally jump over uneven surfaces with the wheels coming off. In 2017, they tried to improve the damping elements, but somehow they couldn't completely solve the problem, so the most meticulous fans of the model immediately changed the standard shock absorbers to analogs from other manufacturers. With them, the behavior becomes more collected. However, upgrading the chassis is an optional activity. By the way, at one time the Russian branch of the Icelandic company Arctic Trucks prepared a special version of the Pajero Sport model called it 35, which is where the correct springs, shock absorbers, spacers, and amplifiers are located, and wheels with an outer diameter of as much as 35 inches significantly improve cross-country ability and can be bought as a ready-made option, or you can order modifications to your car. Yes, all this is not cheap. However, firstly, the company legalizes its modifications, and secondly, Mitsubishi dealers recognize such tuning, so the official manufacturer's warranty remains, but again, tuning is voluntary. But what needs to be done is to thoroughly lubricate the camber bolts with a mask. They can turn sour in just one winter if the roads are generously watered with reagents. But it is useless to demand any repair if the steering will bite slightly when turning sharply at low speeds. Consider that this is some kind of design feature. Apparently it is trivial for the hydraulic booster. Lacks performance. Now let's sum it all up. By and large, the third-generation Mitsubishi Pajero Sport is a good diesel engine without the problem of an 8-speed automatic transmission. The all-wheel drive system is great and strong. Even if it's a peculiarly tuned suspension, rust is certainly a minus, but it's important or it's up to you to decide. On the other hand, A used third-generation Mitsubishi Pajero Sport will cost significantly less than its competitors. This means it makes sense to choose it, and then spend money on proper anti-corrosion treatment.